This video is part and introduction of the acceptance speech of the Colby Prize 2017, delivered on the 27th of July 2018 at the University of Victoria, British Columbia, at the annual conference of the Research Society for Victorian Periodicals. Other videos, which were also part of the acceptance speech, can be found on the Research Society's Facebook page. Many, many thanks for such an elegant laudation, Kitty. It's a profound and humbling honour to be here. On behalf of our contributors, I want to thank the Research Society not only for this honour, and of course Vanita Colby for endowing the prize in honour of her husband, Robert, but also for everything the Research Society does to forward research in the extremely broad and influential field of 19th-century periodicals and newspapers, including, of course, the Colby, the Wolf, and the numerous awards it offers. I also want to thank the University of Victoria for hosting us so warmly, and Lisa Surridge in particular for helping with the technological demands of this presentation. It's a delight, too, to acknowledge the co-organisers of the conference, the Victorian Studies Association of Western Canada. While this list does threaten to become rather Academy Awards, it would be criminal not to mention Andrea Stewart from St Paul's, whose patience and technological expertise has rescued us yet again. It's great to be here in the flesh this year for this second award. Though in a few minutes I do promise you a video, thoughtful words from Joanne Shattuck and Margaret Beetham, and a consideration of an unexpected topic from our co-editor, John Morton, who, Prospero-like, is enjoying the magic of a Twitter-free Mediterranean island with his family. He's charged me, his errant Ariel, with sending you his especial thoughts and a promise that he'll catch up with the conference when he returns to London and the electronic melee in a week's time. What we've organised for you today is firstly about 10 minutes general provocation from me. Then one of our wonderful contributors will speak live to you for a few minutes, someone you'll all know, Professor Catherine Waters. Then we'll play the videos from Joanne, Margaret and John, and then Alexis in person will wrap up with some wise words before you head off for drinks. While not all our contributors were able to be here or to make a video of this lecture, we do hope nonetheless that with this multi-person contribution to the Colby tradition, we're reflecting back to you what you already know, the vital importance of collaboration and discussion, of networks, both social and technological. Now, Alexis, John and I wanted the case studies volume to be a methodological companion to the Rutledge. Both volumes were conceived and contracted at the same time, way back in 2012, but we always planned the case studies to come out after the handbook, as we wanted contributors to the shorter volume to reflect on the procedural issues that the larger volume had brought up. The case studies volume, in other words, we thought of as a commentary on the handbook, addressing gaps and silences, especially in matters of how we tell stories, how we construct knowledge from and about 19th-century periodicals. One review of the handbook suggested that it ignored theory, and by that the reviewer meant that we weren't citing Bakhtin, Habermas and Bourdieu enough, but we don't believe that theory refers to a canon of authority figures. For us, theory is, if you'll forgive this ugly Latinism, the spectacularization of knowledge formation. Now, I hope I'm not boring you when I remind you that theory derives from the ancient word theoreo, to see, but also contemplate. The same word lies at the root of theatre. Theoros was someone who consulted a seer, an oracle. But for us, theory consists not simply in consulting and quoting the Delphic oracles of Foucault or Derrida, though you'll see that we certainly do turn to them for inspiration if you've read the introduction to the case studies. Rather, theory for us consists in laying bare the constraints and enablers of our knowledge, rendering visible, putting on stage, as it were, the forces that determine the stories that we can tell. We wanted to spotlight the theatre of theory rather than the oracular. And this preference is something we remember from long ago, when theory was at its most fashionable. The theatrical element of theory is what I meant with that ugly term, spectacularization of knowledge formation, displaying how the stage effects of knowledge and narrative are produced so that the reader can decide for themselves what's really at stake. This brings me to a consideration of the title of this lecture, The Shape of Water. Its multiple resonances will ring loud and clear to you, I'm sure. It will bring to mind, of course, the visceral, Academy Award-winning Del Toro film about interspecies love and interracial friendship, starring Sally Hawkins, Amanda Richter, and a water god, and the film's interesting companion novel, more particularly to students of Victorian periodicals. The Shape of Water will recall the well-known analogy made famous by one of RSVP's founders, Michael Wolff, that likens 19th-century periodicals to a golden stream, an idea picked up later by many, many others, some of whom you can see on the screen. It's an image extended into a sea by others, including Margaret Beetham in her video, and by Joanne Shattuck in the title of her famous collection, Samples and Soundings. But I have to confess, I was also thinking of Andrea Camilleri first Inspector Montalbano novel, La forma dell'acqua, The Shape of Water. It's an Italian detective novel which came out in 1993. If you've read the novel or seen the TV adaptation, you may remember that the title is explained by the widow of the wealthy man whose death the inspector is investigating. She offers an allegory of how we're condemned to what she regards as the ridiculous activity of asking pointless questions like, what is the shape of water? Her story, right at the centre of the novel, asks us to reflect on the reliability of the detective's understanding of what he discovers and the ethics of the story he constructs, the ethics and the epistemological processes of how he has shaped the water, the flux of his perceptions, his discoveries. If, for example, he hadn't been dazzled by the appearance of the angel at that very moment of enlightenment, perhaps the angel was the dead man's lover, would the inspector have come to different conclusions? If he himself weren't suffering from issues with his father, would he have assembled the family romance he did? How then do we give a shape to the stream of Victorian periodicals? In the Del Toro novel, water imagery is associated with love, the natural and with raw experience. The water god, whose consciousness we enter from time to time in the novel, thinks in Molly Bloom-like stream of consciousness, despite his protestations to the contrary, shaped for sure, but unconstrained by the rhythms and logical units of reading that stops and commas, installments and issues try to enforce. I've yet to see an article in Victorian Periodicals Review written like that. The forces of the academic conventions we're subject to forbid that kind of shaping, even if the idea of a stream of consciousness is a Victorian one, and we refer all the time to periodicals as a stream. What's at stake for us in channeling flow into conventional saucepans and teapots? While I've watched blogs and read blogs on Victorian periodicals, I've been very struck by the effects of electronic technologies on the conceptualization of our research subject and the questions we can ask about it. The articles in Victorian Periodicals Review still mainly derive at a considerable distance, it's true, from procedures developed in scientific periodicals in the 19th century. I've never read a truly serial narrative account of a periodical, nor yet heard an account of a Victorian periodical communicated through the flow of music, or even one beyond the literal stage, marking the emergence of a text from an abstract blankness into pages handled by bodies. But who knows what forms the future reconfiguration of institutional and technological forces will result in? Perhaps then we need to ask a different, or at least another question. Less how we can shape the golden stream of periodicals than what are the forces that cause us to shape it in certain ways and exclude others. Perhaps we need to think about the physics, not just the aesthesis of the stream, not just about the pearls we can pluck out of it, or the course it runs, as Michael Wolff suggested, but also about the laws and forces that enable and constrain us as individuals and collectives to pick up one pearl for examination, or map a certain oyster bed and not another. This is, I think, key to what we've tried to do in the case studies. We've tried to highlight both the discursive and archival constraints on our knowledge, and also our own individual social and technological networks, the inadequacies and violent suppressions of inherited bibliographical description and of generic and disciplinary shoehorning, the economic and geographical positions of the researcher. Indeed, as we read in Chandrika Kaur's chapter, the point of view of the researcher as media historian, textual scholar, and a historian of empire shaped her story of periodicals and empire. Or, in Jerry Beacon's case, his perspective was shaped by his professional background in the publishing industry as a graphic designer, and in Beth Gaskell's, by her training as a librarian. The organization today of our discipline and our affiliations, affective and professional, together with the market and institutional forces we're all subject to, affect the stories we can tell just as much as our shared commitment to an ethics of equality and diversity, to justice and evidential truth, at a time when these are embattled more than ever I remember in my lifetime. We must ensure that we hold on to those values and practices. Consciousness of how those values and practices are embodied and translated from and onto the pages before us will help us, do help us, at times of dire threat. Now, you'll have noticed, of course, that my theoretical oracles here, my prompts for self-reflection, are not primarily the canonized auteur of late 20th century French theory, but a popular Italian novel from the 1990s and a commercial American spin-off from a film from the very year the Case Studies volume came out. I'm sure you'll all have understood too that this is a deliberate provocation to encourage us to think through what's at stake when we consult or simply invoke Derrida or Foucault or Michael Wolff to decide the truth of our subject, or indeed when we read a 19th century text through its contemporaries. These texts are our contemporaries. Should we read what we do through them? I'm not, of course, arguing against historical interpretation, but I do want us to be conscious of what's really at stake in performing it. We come with historical baggage, which includes how we've been trained, where we work now, our age and sex and ethnic, sexual and class identities, and so on. When Gillian Beer addressed this issue 30 years ago in her famous essay on the representation of women, she was arguing for a strongly historicist understanding where, through assiduous historical research, we try to put ourselves into the subject positions available in the past, and try to register the difference of the past from our subject positions today. As she herself said, using language familiar again to us through V21, she was anti-presentist. The historicist project still remains vital, as you'll shortly hear from my colleagues. But what we wanted the case studies volume to call for was actually a double attention to the specificity of the past and its difference from now, argued through the rigorous marshalling of evidence, and an attention to those very cultural conditions within which we receive texts, and how they affect what texts from the past we encounter and how we understand them. It strikes me that this self-consciousness of practice, which I see everywhere around me here, is yet another sign of the maturity and vitality of research into Victorian periodicals, its past and its project. I know I risk disagreeing with some colleagues here, but Victorian periodicals seem to me no longer marginal in the Academy. On the contrary, they seem everywhere in 19th century studies. To mention their importance has become a commonplace even in volumes which do not seriously consider their peculiar nature. We no longer have to struggle just to get Victorian periodicals read and recognized as key phenomena in the 19th century. What we have to do, and we shall always have to do this, is reflect on what is at stake for us in considering Victorian periodicals and newspapers in the ways we do. To ask not only what is the shape of the golden stream and what pearls we can pluck from it, but what might be the underlying topographies that lead us to shape it as we do, and what pearls we can find, and to ensure that that topography continues to favour their discovery. It's this double awareness, then, that motivated the Case Studies volume, just as it motivated the title of this Colby lecture, and indeed its more accurate revision into an ongoing project and process. Thank you.